Well, it ended up being such a busy morning. I was standing in for Laura on her BBC One show this morning. And it's one of those days where ministers get up early to come on the TV or radio and talk about whatever announcement it is they want to talk about, something specifically to do with their brief. Today it was Ed Milliband, the Energy Secretary, his shadow, Claire Coutinho, and the new Green Party leader of England and Wales, Zack Polanski. And they all wanted to talk about how they had the right plan to get your energy bills down. But then there were more allegations about Prince Andrew in the Sunday newspapers. So obviously I asked him about that. And we are going to talk about both of those things on today's edition of Newscast. Hello, it's Victoria in the studio.
It's Simon in the studio.
And Henry at home.
And newscasters will have heard Justin Webb and Mariana Spring talking about Prince Andrew yesterday, relinquishing his titles. Let's talk about some of these new allegations in the Sunday papers. Henry, what was in the Mail on Sunday?
So the Mail on Sunday had what was probably the most incendiary of the new allegations concerning Prince Andrew. It said that he had asked his police protection, so a Met police officer, to investigate Virginia Giuffre just before that notorious photo of her meeting with Prince Andrew back in 2011 was published. Obviously, that is a very serious allegation. And we heard, I think, during your programme, Victoria, that the Met Police are saying now that they are going to look into that. There's no clear evidence, by the way, that the Met Police officer ever did do what Prince Andrew asked them to do. But nevertheless, pretty significant in terms of fresh revelations or fresh claims here.
And just to remind newscasters, that they probably remember anyway, Prince Andrew, as you know, in that Newsnight interview back in 2019 said he didn't recollect ever meeting Virginia Giuffre, and he suggested that photo that you're talking about with Prince Andrew's arm around Virginia Giuffre when she was a 17-year-old, he said was potentially a fake. And then what about the Telegraph and Times?
So the Sunday Telegraph talking about how Prince Andrew had sought to dig up dirt on Virginia Giuffre, so similar but with perhaps a bit less detail than the Mail on Sunday. And then the Sunday Times saying that the Prince of Wales was not satisfied merely with the decision that was announced yesterday and that is likely to take various other measures to sort of banish Andrew from royal life, including banning him from attending William's coronation, whenever that comes.
Yeah, thinking ahead somewhat on that one, I suppose royalty does get to think quite a long way in advance. It was just interesting that it seems that the stepping down, being deduked on the Friday, was presumably in anticipation that they knew some of this was coming. And the questions we were asking this morning is, where do you go from here? You've already given up the Duke of York status, along with the Order of the Garter, a bunch of other honorific titles, some of them quite obscure. But the question now people are asking is, what happens? Are you Prince forever? Can you be plain old Andrew Windsor? Can he make a gesture by moving out of the Royal Lodge, which he's still a tenant of, although seems to have a pretty rock-solid tenancy agreement in there? But a lot of people asking that question. In fact, there's a pub not far from here at Broadcasting House called the Duke of York. And for the last few years, many years, it's had a picture of not any old Duke of York, but the very recently former Duke of York. That's come down in the last few weeks. And I, in fact, went down to talk to people outside Buckingham Palace to find out what they make of it, because a lot of this is done in the court of public opinion, isn't it?
Yes. I think it matters and we should care.
Okay, and so if he worked for an organisation, he would have been sacked, and I suppose this is kind of a sacking.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Okay.
Anybody that's involved with that and it can be proven should be sacked.
I think one should not be judged for what someone else in your family has done.
Still the royal family.
Still the royal family?
Yeah, I've traveled all the way from Africa to come and see. So yes, nothing changes.
And it wouldn't put you off. Where have you come from in Africa?
From Zambia.
Zambia. Well,
Yes.
Welcome. What do you think about the royal family, young man?
I think they're amazing. Buckingham Palace is humongous and the place looks really beautiful.
I think the fact that he has stepped down, it clears the royal family. As a public institution, it is free from that tainting by a particular person.
That's interesting that last gentleman was saying it's free from tainting by that particular person, i.e. Prince Andrew. Because some of the questions that people are asking, and that I was asking of the guests on Laura's show this morning on BBC One, Sky Roberts, the brother of Virginia Giuffre, said to Newsnight on Friday, look, we would call on the King to actually take away the Prince bit from Prince Andrew, because that is in his gift, as I understand it. And another question that I was asking of the Energy Secretary was, would you support legislation to strip the dukedom from Prince Andrew? Because, yes, he's relinquished it. It just means it's in abeyance. He could still decide tomorrow if he wanted, he could use it again. But to officially remove it would require an act of legislation, an act of parliament. So that will be down to parliamentarians. And Ed Milliband didn't really want to go there. He said, we'll be guided by the King, which is, obviously we expect him to say that. I also asked guests if they agreed with Rachel Maskell, the York Central MP, who called on the royal family to explain how Prince Andrew funded the reported £12 million settlement that he paid to Virginia Giuffre back in 2017. Here is Ed Milliband.
Well, look, these are deeply concerning allegations that we are seeing in the papers, and I think all of our thoughts will be with the victims of Jeffrey Epstein. I think that the right thing as a government minister to say this is a matter for the royal family. I think it's the right thing that, I think so. It's right that Prince Andrew has relinquished his titles. I think the royal family will have to make its own decisions about sort of what, if anything, what other steps might be taken. But I think it is a matter for them.
Officially, though, he will still retain the dukedom. It could be removed by an act of parliament. Would you support legislation to do that?
We're going to be guided by the royal family and His Majesty the King
but on
this.
A personal level, would you support legislation to remove his dukedom?
I think it's right that he's relinquishing the titles, and I think that's
you're evading my question.
No, I'm not evading my question.
Would you support any legislation?
I think we'll be guided by the royal family on this as to whether. I think the royal family have said that they didn't want to take up parliamentary time with this. There are lots of other things that Parliament is discussing. I think it's right he's given up his titles.
I think it's safe to say, guys, based on Ed Milliband's answers there, that politicians are not exactly keen, certainly the government is not exactly keen to get itself enmeshed in all of this. I mean, I guess there are moments in history where governments have played quite a big role in royal crises. Thinking certainly of Tony Blair and New Labour's role after the death of Princess Diana, perhaps also, politicians' roles in the abdication crisis in the 1950s. But I think there's probably very specific circumstances that have to arise. And one of them is that the government has to be pretty popular at that moment and feel like it is representing the public will on this. And I can't see Keir Starmer or other members of his government wanting to sort of intercede in this.
I know there are obviously some victims here whose interests should be paramount. One thing that came up this morning in discussion was what William, Prince of Wales, is feeling about this. This is an unwanted irritation for him, ongoing car crash. And he's been quite clear about he wants a slight reset about the role of the royal family, and this can't be helping him at all in that regard.
No. And there was a suggestion on the BBC One show that King Charles is trying to manage this scenario so that actually it's not in William's in tray when he takes over, essentially.
We've had a question from a newscaster on our Discord server. Does the removal of all of his titles mean that Prince Andrew, other than being a Queen's son, is now a private citizen? Does it, in theory, clear a path for easier prosecution in the future, or mean nothing more than just less or fewer names? I don't know if Henry, we don't have any legal experts here, but Henry, do you want to try and take that?
I'm not a legal expert, big caveat. And obviously, as we've said a few times, Andrew denies any wrongdoing. So, as far as he's concerned, there would be nothing to prosecute. But I mean, I think all members of the royal family, whatever their titles, are meant to be subject to the same laws as all the rest of us. So, in theory, no, I don't think it does matter. And I think the reason that the King has decided to take these decisions appears to be more a reflection of sort of public sentiment that, way short of any legal proceedings, that Andrew is not a, right and proper person to be part of the royal family anymore. I think it's much more on that basis rather than, thinking about what the future consequences for him might be legally.
And one other thing that came up this morning is what happens to Princesses Eugenie and Beatrice. the consensus appears to be that even if he was demoted down to plain old Andrew Windsor, they would remain princesses. And the point was made that they are actually very, close to the king, in fact. And so they would be not affected if he was, in fact, de-princed as well as de-duked.
We're obviously expecting the posthumous memoir from Virginia Giuffre to be published on Tuesday. We had that email last week that emerged that showed Prince Andrew had emailed Jeffrey Epstein in February 2011, even though he told Emily Maitlis in that Newsnight interview that he'd broken all contact with him the year before. And Emily was on the show with us this morning, and she gave her reaction to the allegations made today in the Mail on Sunday.
I mean, what we heard from the Mail on Sunday today is that he had asked one of his close security to obtain her social security number with the intense purpose of, I guess, trying to malign her or to drag her through the dirt. Now, this comes in the week where we will be hearing from Virginia Giuffre through her own voice. Her memoir is published on Tuesday. It will be harrowing. It will be devastating.
I've read it. It is.
And it will document a life of pain and a woman who was in so much trauma that believed by speaking out she could help others through what she had gone through and that she could in some way try and repair the damage to her own life. She's dead. She died by suicide 6 months after she finished co-writing that book. And I think if there have been people responsible for trying to make her life even more unbearable than it was, then I would like to see justice done.
This is not over. I think that is the consensus. There is a huge pressure in the United States from both Democrats and Republicans who want the Epstein files out there. It's not happened yet, but the pressure is huge.
Including from unexpected quarters like Marjorie Taylor Greene,
Absolutely
massive Trump
right.
supporter, really got the bit between the teeth on that one
because
as
he
well.
promised it when he was campaigning to be president for a second time. So you just think there's going to be more stuff coming out about Prince Andrew, at some point, and certainly the details which are in this memoir from Virginia Giuffre put all the incidents together of when she says she was forced to have sex with Prince Andrew, which he denies, as we know. So there is more to come.
Mm-hmm.
Right, energy, over to you guys.
Well, I mean, whilst you had on your programme this morning Ed Milliband, as you've already mentioned, and that's what he wanted to talk about this morning, and he was talking about he wants to generate hundreds of thousands of new green jobs, but having interviewed him myself a couple of times, looking at energy policy, it's clear that even within his own party, he's cutting a more and more isolated figure, having been the sort of champing at the bit with his net zero targets. One thing that the government, I think, does agree on at the moment is that energy bills are a big focus. Cost of living is a big focus. They need to make people feel that they are getting better off, or at least not getting as worse off as quickly as before. And there's been lots of hints that they're looking at, for example, cutting VAT, which is currently 5% on energy bills. He was a bit coy about that this morning. He said cutting bills was his top priority and stood by his pledge to drop bills, a big pledge he made, by £300 a year by 2030.
Have a look at this research from More in Common. Most people think your main job as Energy Secretary should be getting bills down. It's the number one priority for people when they're
right.
questioned. OK, well, before the election, you promised energy bills would fall by £300 by 2030. Everyone's bills are going up. Are you standing by that promise?
Bills are too high, and we stand by our promise to get bills down by up to £300 by 2030. And look, the reason why bills are so high, Victoria, and this is really, really important, is because of our dependence on fossil fuels. The gas price is still 75% higher than it was before Russia invaded Ukraine. And there is only one route to get bills down, which is to go for clean power, homegrown, clean energy that we control, so we're not at the behest of the petrostates and the dictators. That was the plan we fashioned in opposition. That is the plan I'm working on, and I know my responsibilities.
Henry, I wonder if it's getting harder for Ed Milliband because the consensus is breaking down, because bills are still high.
I mean, I think mostly because bills are still high, as you said, and as you rightly pressed him on earlier on the programme. I think it is rare to have both the main government person on the Sunday round, as we call it, and the main opposition person both wanting to talk about the same issue and both coming from very different perspectives. I think that's a really interesting thing. Ed Milliband believes that this is a good story for him and for the government to tell, not just in and of itself about the energy transition he wants to bring about, but also because he believes that energy policy is a kind of gateway to where he wants the country to go on industrial policy and on public investment. Making an argument for public investment. Meanwhile, the Conservatives, in the form of Claire Coutinho, Ed Milliband's shadow, and his predecessor, by the way, as Energy Secretary towards the end of the Conservative years, thinks that the public, or certainly a large chunk of the public now, thinks that this is all, ridiculous, and especially given bills are still too high. And I do think one of the most important developments which has happened in the last 15 or so months since Labour came into office is that sort of political consensus, or at least it was a Westminster consensus, on net zero, which, remember, was brought in by Theresa May in her final weeks as Prime Minister, the legal target to get there by 2050, has completely broken down. And we saw that vividly this morning. But worth noting, I think Simon rightly said, Ed Milliband is not universally agreed with within the Labour Party on this. And just to bring us back to the government reshuffle, the massive reshuffle which took place, 5 or 6 weeks ago, Keir Starmer tried to move Ed Milliband. He tried to make him housing secretary. I'm still not quite clear. I'm trying to do more reporting on what exactly it was that meant that Keir Starmer didn't want Ed Milliband to be the energy secretary. But there's all these important decisions coming down the track for Ed Milliband, for this government, and the Prime Minister didn't actually want Ed Milliband to be making them.
And what are some of those important decisions, Simon?
So there's a couple of really key ones. There's a big oil and gas field off the coast of Shetland called Rosebank. Massive find there, hundreds of millions of barrels of oil and gas equivalents over the next few years. In opposition, Ed Milliband described it as an act of climate vandalism. But the High Court actually struck down the application, saying they didn't take into account the environmental impact sufficiently when they applied to develop this field. Now, those applications are back in, and that application will end up on Ed Milliband's desk as the Secretary of State.
And the Labour manifesto promise was no new licences for oil and gas fields. The wiggle room here might be, actually, this was already approved by the Tories. There was a bit of a hiccup with the judicial process, so it's not a new licence, it's an existing licence.
There's even more fudgery going on here around the fact that does this count as a new oil field or not, because we could tie it back to the one that's existing and blah, blah, blah.
Right.
All I can tell you is that people in the energy industry who are associated with this project are pretty confident they are going to find a way to make this happen and allow this oil and gas field. That will be a big moment.
Yeah.
I think that some of the people, particularly in the Treasury, will be looking at the fact that a lot of investment is going out of the North Sea. The amount of tax take has been sort of dwindling despite this kind of extra taxes they've put on it. I think they are convinced that those arguments will win the day. And I think that's going to be a moment where some people will say, Ed Milliband, are you going to resign? I really do.
Yeah. Henry, that's a good point, because it's a difficult one. The unions want Ed Milliband to approve this continuing exploration because it's good for their members' jobs. But you will have some Labour supporters for whom the climate is really, really important, who are saying this is a real test of Ed Milliband's climate net zero credentials, won't you?
Yeah, and I think it shows the difficulty of Labour winning so big. Obviously, that's a silly thing to say. Labour were delighted to have won so big, but they won with a very broad and quite shallow coalition, which spans, people who, voted Labour because they want good jobs and people who really passionately care about the climate. And I think it gets to some of those political dilemmas which face Keir Starmer, really, in the run-up to the next general election or even into next May's local elections, which cut across some of those tensions. You've got elections taking place in Scotland in May, where oil and gas is a big issue. But you've also got elections taking place in London boroughs or lots of inner city areas where a lot of Labour voters would want to see the Labour Party, stand up for the climate as they would see it. Or they might vote Green. And, you had Zack Polanski, the new self-styled eco-populist, on the programme this morning. And, a lot of people I speak to in the Labour Party who face that kind of challenge from the left are really worried about him. They think he's a very articulate champion of that kind of politics who would call them out in a way that would be appealing to those sort of Labour voters or sort of floating left-wing voters who want the government to take a stand on the climate.
And just bringing it back to where you started with this discussion, Victoria, which was on the bill payers. The truth is that sort of both arguments are right on this.
You mean Labour and Tory?
Well, both the argument that net zero is both costing us money and eventually will save us money, in the sense that, there is a future which I think a lot of people would want, where we have nice, reliable, green, offshore wind, solar, blah, blah, blah.
And we're self-sufficient.
All that kind of good stuff. The point is that the money it takes to build the infrastructure for that to happen is enormous. We're talking tens, maybe hundreds of billions of pounds over the next 10, 20, 30 years. And as things work out at the moment, it's the bill payers who foot that bill over the fullness of time. So the future may look rosy, but getting there is actually very expensive. And that's where the dilemma right at the heart of this. And that's the reality that bill payers will see.
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons the Conservatives say that they're not going for this 2050 net zero target anymore. They say it's unachievable. And Claire Coutinho actually revealed to us this morning that they don't seem to have a net zero target date at all. When do you want to hit net zero by, assuming the Conservatives still do want to hit net zero at some point?
So we think decarbonisation is not a bad thing. I think caring about pollution is important. But at the moment, the targets are actually pulling you in the wrong directions, because what you're doing, on the one hand, is making electricity really expensive. But if you want to decarbonise, the thing you have to do is get people to use electric products, cars, home heating, industry to electrify their machinery.
So by
when?
So
we don't have a target. What we've said is we need to. What we've said we think the target is not. We're not able to meet that 2050 target. So our policy is this: if we bring down the cost of electricity, electrification will be much easier. So the primary focus in the years ahead is to deal with the biggest problem the country has in energy policy, that we have the highest electricity prices in the world. And as I said before, we've set out a cheap power plan that tomorrow could cut people's electricity bills by 20%.
Meanwhile, Zack Polanski of the Greens said the way to reduce everybody's energy bills is to introduce a wealth tax. We've got Paul Johnson in March this year, formerly of the Institute for Fiscal Studies. No country in the world has ever successfully had a wealth tax that raised serious money. That's what I'm questioning.
And I think they're legitimate questions. I'd also say those aren't tiny amounts of money. So actually, whatever you're going to create from a wealth tax is ultimately about reducing inequality. This isn't about creating public investment. We can do that anyway. We don't need to tax the wealthy to do that. This is ultimately about tackling the deep inequality in our society. In terms of Paul Johnson and the IFS, they very much look to protect and maintain the status quo. And what I would say is, the status quo, the economy is not working for almost anyone at the moment, unless you're in that top 1%
right. Don't you
of the wealthiest.
The IFS are independent?
They are independent, but there's been reports just last week around their connection with Barclays and some of the things that they've been saying. I think it's legitimate to question economists, no matter where they come from.
And I thought what was really interesting in that exchange was that you presented him with various international examples of why a wealth tax might not raise as much money as the Green Party would like it to, and so on. But eventually Zack Polanski said, well, look, this isn't actually about raising money in order to fund X and Y. This is about reducing inequality. And I thought that was such an important and revealing moment, because it showed that actually the frame through which Zack Polanski sees discussions around the economy is completely different to the one that the main parties do. It is not about raising X amount of money in order to fund certain things. It is reducing inequality as an end in and of itself. And I thought that was just a really interesting point to emphasise. Yeah. It was a very revealing answer.
He really does want to, or he intends to, try to change the conversations that he says he hears all the time around, a wealth tax, and the kind of interviews, Simon, you've done, I've done, Henry, you've done over the years. He's starting now.
Having said that, it wouldn't be Sunday with 5 weeks before the budget unless we did get a little bit of argy-bargy about how much could you raise to pay for this. And with a short plug for BH Broadcasting House this morning, we spoke to Fred Doan of Betfred fame this morning. And he said that if the government goes ahead with some of the ideas that have been floated on hikes to gambling tax, he would close all 1,300 Betfred shops in the country with the loss of 7,500 jobs, saying that it just wouldn't make any money. Now, some people will say not everyone will cry a river if the local betting shop goes down. Some people say if it doesn't cause socioeconomic deprivation, it sometimes preys on it. But we've had a few warnings from the owners of William Hill, the owners of Paddy Power. This is the starkest one yet. Gordon Brown has got involved in this debate. He said that a big hike in gambling tax could help to pay for a lifting of the two-child benefit cap. It would raise about $3 billion or so. Plenty of candidates on what that money should be spent for, but some pretty stark warning from the gambling industry saying we've been hit up with a lot of things over the years. If you go this far, as some are suggesting, your local bookie could disappear.
That's it for this edition of Newscasters. Can I mention Newsnight tomorrow? I am talking to the co-author of Virginia Giuffre's memoir, Amy Wallace. She'll be with us live on Newsnight tomorrow night, BBC 2, 10:30. I hope
sounds unmissable.
Okay. Henry, thank you. Good
Thanks
to see
very
you.
much.
Thank you. Simon, nice to see you.
Thank you, Victoria.
See you soon. Bye.